Chapter 4 Houdiniville. The checker cab whisked them through Harlem toward 278 West 113th Street, the brick townhouse Houdini purchased in 1904 for the then colossal price of $25,000. The area was at the time described quite accurately by the New York Times as a genteel enclave. The complexion of the neighborhood had decidedly changed since the author's last visit, as more and more blacks migrated from the Deep South to escape Jim Crow and seek their fortunes in the bustling metropolis. Houdini himself had never had a bad experience with his neighbors. Admittedly, there had been that single unfortunate incident years ago in which his physician brother Leopold confronted a razor-wielding burglar, tumbled down a flight of stairs with a crook, and ended up in a hospital with 100 wounds. But the siblings had certainly encountered worse crime growing up on the streets. Black men in natty suits, with fedoras tilted rakishly and pencil-thin mustaches, strolled arm in arm with women in fashionable dresses rising nearly to the knee, and boyish bobs with stylish curls and waves. They looked like pairs of movie stars on the back lot of a Hollywood studio. Young mothers pushed strollers, cooing to the infants snuggled inside. Children played double-dutch, jacks, and hopscotch on the sidewalk, under the watchful eyes of grandmothers seated at windows. As a taxi neared his home, some residents waved to the escape artist, and Houdini waved back, clearly basking in the adulation.
"One hears the name Harlem, and one expects to see windmills and milkmaids and wooden shoes," said Conan Doyle. "Instead, you have a picturesque little Africa here."
"Oh, Little Africa's downtown," Houdini grinned. "The blocks around my digs are Houdiniville." Books engulfed Houdini's townhouse from the basement to the 4th floor, where his office, workroom, and library were located. He'd spent a fortune amassing the world's greatest collection of books on the history of magic and the paranormal. It had taken 3 moving vans to transport the volumes he owned when he and Bess moved in, and his library had increased many-fold since the last time Sir Arthur was in the study. The magician climbed down a ladder with a thick book in hand, blew the dust off the jacket, and handed it to the author. "Here's a book on haunted houses by Jameson. He devotes a whole chapter to violent spirits. We can bone up on the train ride south."
"Should make for some jolly reading,"
Conan Doyle joked, taking the book and scanning the gruesome illustrations.
"Well, I don't suppose your men could have dug up much in 3 weeks, not when the Pinkertons failed."
"Oh, you'll be surprised. They're kind of like your Baker Street irregulars," Houdini said, referring to the dirty-faced urchins who were so invaluable to Sherlock Holmes in procuring the word on the street. Conan Doyle looked around the study. Houdini's desk was piled high with pamphlets, posters, and memorabilia for magicians of years gone by. As meticulous a schemer as Houdini was, it surprised the author that the performer's physical surroundings were so chaotic.
"By the way, old man, any chance of a confession coming down the pike regarding the slate writing?"
The last time Conan Doyle had been in the house, Houdini performed a singular mind-reading trick that climaxed with an invisible hand writing on a slate a biblical phrase the author had scribbled and placed in his back pocket. "Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin," the writing on Belshazzar's wall. The exercise was, Houdini claimed, intended to demonstrate that any of the supposedly paranormal feats Conan Doyle had seen performed by clairvoyants were in fact achieved through trickery. The effort backfired, however. Much to Houdini's frustration, Conan Doyle was convinced that the magician had actually used mystical means. "I can only repeat that the effect was achieved through perfectly ordinary techniques," Houdini said. Conan Doyle raised his eyebrows skeptically.
Come, dear boy, I'm not the doddering half-wit I appear."
An assistant in a hidden passage on the other side of the wall had used a magnet to move the writing implement, but Houdini was loath to reveal how his tricks were done. The doorbell rang, rescuing the magician. "That's Schwartzberg now," Houdini said excitedly. A pretty colored maid ushered the newcomer in, and a few moments later they could hear his footsteps on the stairway. Schwartzberg was a scrawny man with a toothbrush mustache and a comically long proboscis suggestive of a rat. He was in his 20s, but certainly without the wide-eyed gaze of an innocent youth. His darting and untrusting eyes added to his rodential appearance. He wore a brown suit that was a bit too tight. He was a Jew, Conan Doyle supposed idly. In spite of the Germanic name, there was certainly nothing Nordic about him. The spy failed to remove his hat until Houdini elbowed him. "Sir Arthur, this is Schwartzberg. He's the sharpest investigator I've got." "Pleased to make your acquaintance, sir," Schwartzberg said as Conan Doyle overcame his revulsion at the fellow's dirty fingernails and pumped his hand. "What have you got?" Houdini demanded. "This house has quite a nasty history, Mr. Houdini. A reputation for haunting. This wasn't the first disappearance. From 1911 to 13, when it was sort of an inn, at least 3 guests vanished into thin air, and there have been several since." "And what did the owners of this fun house have to say for themselves?" the magician asked. "The name on the deed is George Langdon, who's in a funny farm near Norfolk, Virginia. His son is some kind of engineer, as far as my men could tell."
"Langdon. That name sounds deucedly familiar," the author said. "I do believe I've seen it in a periodical."
"Shouldn't be hard to track him down," Houdini said. "Put your men on it, Schwartzberg. Anything juicy on Judge Parker and Dr. Stratton?" "The judge is a widower, lost his only child to the Spanish flu. He and Stratton were friends since boyhood, roommates in boarding school. No disagreements between them, except they were rivals for the same girl in college, and once came to blows over it." "Aha!" Houdini exclaimed. "Always a dame involved."
"That must have been more than 30 years ago. A bit long to hold a grudge or act upon it."
"If anybody would be steamed, it would be Parker, sir," Schwartzberg informed them. "Stratton ended up marrying the girl." "That's a dead end, then. Darn it," Houdini mumbled, snapping his fingers in disappointment.
"I should think Holmes's irregulars would have come up with a trifle more than that,"
Sir Arthur pointed out smugly. The magician ignored the jibe. "Did you get my wire from the ship?" "Yes, Mr. Houdini, sir. I had a contact in Virginia find Mrs. Stratton and send the letters to the doctor." He handed Houdini a valise. Inside was a treasure trove of at least 60 envelopes, addressed by dozens of different hands. Houdini closed the case and handed it to Conan Doyle. "I think these are enough clues to get us started." They said so long to the performer's spouse, Bess, who was downstairs in the sewing room making decorations for a friend's birthday party. She fussed like a mother hen over Houdini, begging him to be careful. In their old vaudeville days, when she performed as his assistant, she'd been plucky enough to be sawed in half. Now she was prone to bouts of anxiety. "Take good care of him, Sir Arthur," she begged as they parted company at the doorway. "I have a very uneasy feeling about all this."
"That I vow," replied Sir Arthur. As the Virginian Railway locomotive roared toward Richmond, the 2 celebrities breakfasted in the dining car. Houdini lunched on Eggs Benedict, while Conan Doyle wolfed down a hearty English breakfast, highlighted by sausages and fried bread. Between bites, the gentleman perused the stack of letters Dr. Stratton had received. Little appeared to be known about the house other than a general sentiment that it was haunted. Letters from nearby Dunwood mentioned strange sounds emanating from the building long after it was abandoned, horses rearing up and refusing to pass it, dogs howling, and a variety of other hallmarks of the supernatural.
Anything jump out at you?" Houdini asked, sticking a fork into his eggs.
"Enough to convince me there's something quite extraordinary about the house. The devilish part is separating the promising from the poppycock. One housewife in Dunwood says the local Apache Indians swore the place was cursed. I recall my westerns well enough to know Apaches do their scalp collecting out west."
"This fellow in Vermont is awfully helpful," Houdini said, holding up a letter. "He suggests Dr. Stratton have the joint dynamited to kill the ghosts once and for all." Conan Doyle let loose a mighty laugh, and then showed his companion another missive.
"A professor of psychology in California proposes that Dr. Stratton and his companion were hypnotized at their reunion. Well, I suppose that theory bears some looking into. Certainly some of my old professors had a gift for putting me into a deep trance."
"Eureka!" exclaimed Houdini. "Look at this one." He passed a neatly handwritten letter in blue stationery to Conan Doyle. Conan Doyle read the letter aloud.
"Dear Dr. Stratton, a factory worker named Creedmoor was sentenced to 15 years hard labor by Dr. Parker for burning his wife's face. He is a rough customer and now resides about 11 miles outside Dunwood. A friend."
"Imagine a guy'd burn off his own wife's face," said Houdini.
"Certainly dastardly, but would a brute of that sort have the wits to engineer such a complex and devious revenge?"
"I keep him on the short list of suspects, that's for sure," the magician said, and tucked the letter into a rather meager folder they had labeled "Useful."
"Hello," said Sir Arthur, opening another envelope with a penknife and extracting a letter. "This is a photo of the house taken in '95.
The sepia-toned photograph, crumbling at the corners, showed the house in the background. It was not dilapidated back then, but obviously quite old already. The style was neoclassical antebellum, right down to the obligatory white columns. A couple posed casually in front of the house, each holding the hand of a young boy in short pants. The man wore a straw hat, and the woman carried a picnic basket. They were not smiling. People of that era still took portraiture seriously. Nonetheless, they appeared to be at ease. In the doorway behind them, one could make out a blurry figure, roughly in the shape of a human.
"It could be a scratch on the plate, I suppose," Sir Arthur said. "I'd give my eye teeth to see it. But you have to admit, it looks awfully like a spirit manifestation."
"Or maybe someone was moving around back there when the plate was exposed," the magician suggested. Yet, as Houdini stared at the photo, he felt the hairs on his forearms rise, that ancient response to danger that dated back to the missing link. He couldn't take his eyes off the doorway, and had the unpleasant sensation of being drawn into it, as if by a magnet. "I'll say this, the place gives me the creeps already."